Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Monday, December 4th, and it's day 59 since October 7th. The big news right now is in the last 30 minutes, it's almost 4 p.m. here in Chicago. In the last 30 minutes, it has been announced in the news that the Israeli Defense Forces are expanding their ground offensive into southern Gaza. We had heard from the White House, and it had been reported in the news that the Biden administration had strongly urged and said that southern Gaza was a no-go zone, that because the vast majority of civilians who had fled from the north are in the south, that a ground incursion would be incredibly risky for civilians. And yet the news is reporting that the Israeli Defense Forces have crossed into southern Gaza. According to NBC, Israel's push into southern Gaza raises new fears for the masses of civilians crowded into the area, many whom fled bombardment and battles in the north. Gazans are saying there's no safe place for them to go, as Israel is warning them to flee specific neighborhoods. At the same time, rocket fire is continuing from Gaza into Israel. In addition, a senior U.S. military official told NBC News that he was taken back by the ferocity of Israel's renewed campaign, as Washington increasingly has called on its ally to protect civilians. And hostage families in Israel are expressing fear for those who remain captive in Gaza now that fighting has resumed. Beyond Gaza, there were 4 attacks yesterday on commercial vessels in the Red Sea that the United States believes were launched by Iran-backed rebels in Yemen. Drones shot them down. American warships had drones that shot them down, responding to the strikes. I did want to give you some facts and statistics from OSHA, the Office of Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, in terms of what is happening in Gaza, what life is like. Since the resumption of hostilities on December 1st, a few days ago, 700 Palestinians have reportedly been killed, in addition to the more than 15,000 who had been killed prior to December 1st. So that puts the death toll, according to Gazan officials, at more than 16,000. Israeli military operations have expanded into South Gaza, which forces tens of thousands of people into increasingly compressed spaces, further limiting food, water, shelter, and safety. According to OSHA, there is no way we're safe in Gaza, and there is nowhere left to go. The conditions required to deliver aid do not exist, even if possible. And a more hellish scenario is about to unfold. One of the humanitarian operations, they won't be able to respond. So according to OSHA, they said this: what we see today in shelters is no capacity, a health system that's on its knees, a lack of clean drinking water, no proper sanitation, poor nutrition for people who are already mentally and physically exhausted, a textbook formula for epidemics and a public health disaster. The quantities of relief and fuel supplies allowed are utterly insufficient, despite the enormous efforts of the Egyptian and Palestinian Red Crescent societies, UN agencies, and other partners. The use of the only Rafah crossing meant for pedestrians to bring in trucks and foods does not work. Humanitarian operations cannot be kept on a drip feed of fuel. If the foundation of social services and our operations, including hospitals, desalination plants, clean drinking water, and sanitation. It is the foundation. Fuel is the foundation for all those things working. So in other words, the space for the humanitarian response, instead of it growing and meeting the increasing needs, it's actually decreasing, and it was inadequate to begin with. The 2 main routes have been cut off that were using the roads that were being used to supply humanitarian needs have been cut off. And so humanitarian assistance is further impeded. And so the United Nations and NGOs are unable to provide the support that's needed for the population of more than 2 million people. And so the report that came out today from the United Nations was quite devastating. In addition to that, in the last few days, there was a breaking report that first came out by 972 magazine, and then it was confirmed by The Guardian. And these reports indicated that Israel's army has been expanding its bombing targets to specifically include civilian infrastructure and residences. According to 972 magazine, and this is a quote, these include private residences as well as public buildings, infrastructure, and high-rise blockades. And the source says the army is defining these as power targets. The bombing of these targets, according to intelligence sources who've had firsthand experience with the way that Gaza has been targeted in the past, is intended to harm Palestinian civil society in order to create a shock that will reverberate powerfully and lead civilians to put pressure on Hamas, as one source put it. According to several sources who spoke to 972, and they were anonymous, but they confirmed that the Israeli army has files on a vast majority of potential targets, including homes, that stipulate the number of civilians that are likely to be killed in different attacks, and the number is calculated and known in advance according to the Army's intelligence units, which also know shortly before carrying out an attack roughly how many civilians are going to be killed. So all this is according to 972, and they said this, in one case discussed by sources, the Israeli military command knowingly approved killing hundreds of Palestinian civilians in an attempt to assassinate just one single top Hamas military commander. Quote, the number increased from dozens of civilian deaths permitted as collateral damage as a part of an attack on a senior official in previous operations to hundreds of civilian deaths as collateral damage. And then part of the story that was just so devastating for Christians to read and to hear is that according to this investigation, the system that's being used, which is artificial intelligence, it's called Habsora, which means the gospel. And it's largely built on artificial intelligence that generates targets almost automatically at a rate that far exceeds that which was previously possible. This artificial intelligence system, as described by a former intelligence officer, essentially facilitates what is known, quote, as a mass assassination factory, end quote, which was the title of the article by 972. Churches for Middle East Peace put out a statement on Saturday, and we talked about this and said, this adds to our outrage as Christians who deeply value our scriptures. The reports published by several sources indicating that Israel has accelerated its targeting of civilian infrastructure with civilians inside using its artificial intelligence program that their military calls the gospel. This is anything but good news for civilians in Gaza. A few other additional statistics I wanted to share. These are West Bank statistics. The UN Human Rights Office reported a dramatic increase in the number of Palestinians who've been detained from the West Bank. This also includes East Jerusalem. Since October 7th, over 3,000 Palestinians have been arrested, more than 160 just in the past 6 days. In addition, 6 Palestinian men have died while in Israeli custody, and this raises serious concerns about Israel's compliance with international law. Also, since October 7th, 241 Palestinians, including 63 children, have been killed in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, which 2023 was already the deadliest year for Palestinians since 2005. Since October 7th, 4 Israelis, including 3 members of the Israeli forces, have been killed in attacks by Palestinians in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and 4 additional were killed in West Bank in one a Palestinian attack. 2/3 of Palestinian fatalities in the West Bank since October 7th have occurred during search and arrest, and other operations carried out by Israeli forces. Most of these were in Jenin and Tulkarm governorates. Some involved exchange of fire with Palestinians, but more than half of the fatalities were reported in operations that did not involve armed clashes. And since October 7th, Israeli forces have injured 3,229 Palestinians, including 509 children in the West Bank. 45% of these were in the context of demonstrations, 46% in the context of search and arrest operations. And then the last statistic is that since October 7th, 302 settler attacks have occurred against Palestinians, which reflects a daily average of 5 incidents a day. So it seems to be that things on the ground are getting worse rather than better. I wanted to be sure to keep you informed. We will continue to work and to call. Today's day 2. Since Advent began yesterday. Please go on our website, use our phone number, call your members of Congress. I joined our Monday community calls with Congress today to learn how to use our system. And we'll be calling our members of Congress every day, calling for a ceasefire and an end to the violence.